Now that editing and sound design are complete, let's move on to color grading to give the film that cinematic look. Hey everyone, Camber here, showing you how to use your camera to make good videos. So if you're new, consider subscribing. And this is episode 8 in the behind the scenes look into my short film Coming Home, where we're going to be covering color correction and color grading to give a film a cinematic look. And if you haven't seen the film yet, go over to my other page, Camber Films, check out the short film Coming Home, then come back here and see the behind the scenes. And with that, let's head over to the computer. Color correction is the process of correcting the exposure and white balance to give your film a more natural look like you would see in the real world. Color grading is the process after that. We are applying effects such as saturation, color, sharpness in order to give a certain look to your film. You can see I have all the clips down here. We have this aspect ratio overlay that I talked about in the editing section there. And you see all these purple clips here with color correction over each of the individual clips, and then this long one that says color grade over the top of all of them. And that's my process for this. I color correct each of the clips individually, and then I choose a color grade and then apply that to the whole project. And these overlays you see aren't native plugins to Final Cut Pro. I actually learned this technique from Schiffer, and I'll link his video up here and down in the description so you can check that out. And he has links to download these and instructions how to upload them to Final Cut Pro so that you can use them. But you don't have to use them. You can apply all the effects to each individual clip. However, there's a few reasons why I like to do it this way. One, I like being able, as I'm working through, to easily see what I've finished and what I still need to do. So as I'm going through, if I hadn't finished these yet, I could see, okay, I haven't color corrected any of this part yet. Number two, I can easily turn any of these effects on and off just by pushing V and clicking on any of them. And if I had all of these effects in the clip itself, if I clicked on the clip, it would make it go away if I push V. Whereas I would have to click on it, and then I'd have all of these effects, and I could turn them off with just one click like that, or if there are certain things, I could check them individually. But that's just more steps than I like to do, so I just really like being able to easily click on something, turn it on and off, so I can mess with different styles if I want to do something like that and not lose what I've already done. The other thing is it's really easy to just copy and paste if you have different clips. Like if you just want to compare clips, you can go back and forth to see what you like better. But I pulled a few clips from the video to give you some examples of how I do this. So first, if you are doing this technique, the first thing you do is go into titles. Once you've uploaded all that, find color correction, bring it down over the clip. I like to size it to how I have the clip. Then I'll get rid of that. Next thing I'll do is bring up the inspector, which you can click this button here or push Command 4 and it brings it up for you. Then I bring up a color board and you can drag that over on top of the clip. And what that does for you is brings up this. So you have exposure, saturation, and colors you can change. However, I don't like using this. I actually prefer clicking on that and then coming down to color wheels, and this just gives me a lot more flexibility. So all those same controls are on one page, so I'm not having to click back and forth. So here, this is the master overall, everything in the shot. The left side is your saturation, the right side is your exposure, and the middle is changing colors in your shot. And then you have the same controls for shadows, midtones, and highlights, and we're going to work all those individually. Then you also have here, which isn't on the color board, temperature. So left is cool, right is warm. The tint, so you have green and then magenta. And then the hue I don't really mess with. But it's kind of a pain to go in, add the color board, and change all those. So the way I did this was I went into my Final Cut Pro preferences. And on this first page, you can go down to here, color correction. And it's going to be defaulted to color board most likely. And I went down to color wheels, and there's some other options as well you can choose. So now instead of going down here, clicking color board and adding it, I can just push Command 6 and then everything's right there. I don't have to go add anything. Or if you're opening the inspector and there's nothing there yet, you can just go to this color, click it, and it's going to default to that. So next up, I'm going to push Command 7, and that's going to bring up this waveform here. And if you're not on the waveform, if it looks like this, vector scope or histogram, you can just click on this, go to waveform. So I click the RGB overlay, and now looking at this whole thing, we have 0 is black for your exposure, and then 100 is white. So anything above 100 is going to be overexposed, and then anything below 0 is going to be underexposed. And then we have the red, green, and blue you can see here, and that's going to help us once we get to the white balance part. And looking at the shot here, you can see it looks really washed out initially, and the reason is because I shot this on a certain picture profile on my camera so that it would be a flatter image, less saturation, so that I'd have more to work with when I got in this process. And if you want to see more about picture profiles and why you want to use them, I'll link another video I made here about picture profiles, also down in the description. So starting off with this, I scrubbed through to see pretty much we have right here is the sun and the sky here, which is overexposed. But it's not too bad because it's not in much of the shot. So I go through and see where the peaks are, and right there when the door is opening, you can see it's really bright, and that's the most overexposed spot. So I'm going to work from here, starting with the shadows. I'm going to grab the exposure, and I'm going to bring it down so that this just touches right above the 0, so that we're not going to be underexposing anything. What we're doing here is improving the dynamic range of the shot. So there, and I actually, instead of raising this to make anything touch, since we're already overexposed there, I'm actually going to bring it down so that that overexposed part is right there at the 100. And then with midtones, you can control making the rest look brighter or darker, and I usually go a little bit darker most of the time, and that just gives a little bit of contrast to the shot. So looking at before and after, there's our shot before and then after adjusting exposure. So pretty easy, simple to do there. Next is temperature. So what I'm going to do is drag this towards the left, blue, so that this blue here drags up towards the green till just about overlays on it. And then I'm going to bring the tint to the left as well, so the red comes down and meets the blue. And right about there, they're all pretty much over top of each other. And that's about it for the color correction part. I do typically add saturation here. That's more so part of your color grading, but since I do that on the individual clip basis, I'll go ahead and add saturation to see how much I want, and also to make sure the colors make sense. So looking at all that, it looks pretty good. And if we undo what we did with the temperature and the tint, you can see that it was very warm and yellow. It looks fine, but the whole goal of this is to get it neutral and how it should look, and then later on, if we want it warmer, we can make it warmer. So let's move on to another clip looking at an inside shot. I'm going to start with the shadows. You can see there's not as much room here at the bottom, so I'm just barely going to bring that down right about there. And then for the highlights, these can come up a lot, and you have to be careful here because depending on the style, what you want for the shot, I could keep raising it up until that blue touches the 100 there, but that's just a lot brighter than I actually want it to look like. Since it is nighttime, it's supposed to be a lamp that's lighting her. So I'm going to bring that down a lot here because skin tones are fine in this 50 to 75 range. So I'm going to leave that there, maybe boost this just a little bit in the mid-tone so her face isn't as contrasty. That's pretty good. And these blue, green, and red are a lot easier to see here. So I'm going to move this blue over till it overlays on the green. And I'm going to start moving the red down so it comes to the green. And I'm just going to keep going back and forth with those until they make sense, where all of them are over top of each other. Almost there. See, now they're pretty much all overlaid and are almost completely white. So that tells us that the colors all match. So now when I bring up the saturation, you can see the colors look pretty natural. And I found this process really easy because I used to just bring up the saturation and then sit here and try to make it look right based on how I think it should look, and I would end up going back over and over again and making adjustments because I would end up adjusting too far and then fixing it again back the other way too far. But this way, I'm just using these scopes to tell me where it needs to be. So That's the simple process there. We're going through shadows first on exposure, highlights, and then midtones, and then adjusting the temperature and tint to get the white balance correct, and then bringing up saturation. And doing it in that order is important because depending on what your exposure is, it's going to change the way the colors look. Now I want to show you an example of a time when I don't want to use this color correction overlay. And looking back at the project here, this sequence where we come in from here to here, I have this transition. And the issue with these transitions is, say we had an overlay so that this one was working this clip, this one was working this one. The problem is this transition is going to make those two clips mesh over each other, and so those different color corrections are going to go into the other videos. And so that's a time when I don't want to use that, and I want to actually apply my effects to the individual clips so that as the two shots blend together with that transition, there's not going to be any crossover of the colors from each of the separate clips. However, the color grade's fine because that's applied to the whole project. So now we're going to get into the color grading process. So what I'm going to do with this is go back to those titles. Then I have a separate color grade that I'm going to overlay. What I do is go through the video and look for the hero shot of the film, which for this is when I return home, I'm reunited with the family. When you get to color grading, you can actually go in and make separate color wheels and start getting into these different color curves and these hue saturation curves, and there's a whole lot you can do with this, but I kept it really basic with this project. And the way I did this was with Color Finale Pro here. I'm going to drag that on top of the color grade. I'm going to go in here, open the controls, select this LUT here, which that means lookup table. So you can go in and click show gallery, and it's going to show all these different effects. So one that I typically end up using a lot is this Alexa log, and as you can see, obviously that does not look good. And the thing to keep in mind with these LUTs is typically less is more, because if you see a huge difference, then you're probably doing too much. And I usually end up going around the 10 to 20% range. So click that on there and then just click on and off, and you can see there's just a slight change there. The grass is a little greener, there's a little more contrast in it, and I might bump that up just a little bit, maybe 15, 16. Yeah, so that looks pretty good. Once we have that in there and you like what you see, then you can go through and drag this across your whole project. So now we can see a before and after of how that affects every clip. And then if it looks a little overdone on some of the clips, you can go in, change some of the contrast to make it look how you want in the color correction. So say we didn't like how contrasty that made it, so we could bring this up a little more and make little minor tweaks. And that's another thing I like about these. You can easily go in and make those changes. So getting to here, this is where I am going to add more color grading to the actual clip because I want this to look different from everything else. So once we click on this, you can see I've already added everything in there. I will add sharpening, which I do this on an individual clip basis as well through all the color corrections once I get to this part, because I typically will end up sharpening people's faces a lot less than if I have just objects or scenery views of things. So I have the sharpening on there, and then I put this dream effect on, so that gave us that somewhat washed out look. And same thing with this, you can change the opacity of it. And then I have the Super 8 that I overlaid on that. And as you can see here, they're a little bit blurry, but I really wanted the focus to be on her. So I did this overlay focus where everything's really blurry except her face, and then that helps as it pulls away even more. So with all those effects, you can see that makes a huge difference, and that's one of the things I do love about this color grading, because you can go in and take this normal looking clip. Yeah, I could use that for a memory sequence, but once we add these effects onto it, it gives it a whole different feel and then really sets it apart from the rest of the film as being a memory. And so going back to our original film, that's what I did to everything. We have all the color corrections in place, one color grade that goes over the entire project, and it's just very subtle. You don't need a whole lot. You can go way more in depth on this, and I'm gonna make more videos in the future on how you can color grade with just the tools in Final Cut Pro rather than using Color Finale, because that is a program you do have to pay for, but these are a great tool to help you give a polished look to your film as you're learning to do it yourself. And that's my process for color correction and color grading to achieve that cinematic look in a film. In the next episode, I'm going to be covering how to deal with mistakes in your film, and I'm also going to have a little challenge for you, so stay tuned for that. And if this video was helpful, just help me out by leaving a like, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you soon.